Hey, how's it going? Today, as my first scripted video, I'll be discussing my top 5 favorite games of all time and share insight as to why they made the list. First thing first though, on the interwebs, there seems to be a generalized lack of understanding towards the difference between favorite and best. To summarize, the difference between the two is that one is an absolute and an objective measurement of quality, while the other is individual and defined by one person's specific feelings towards it. A lot of the games I love are not technically the best, but they resonate specifically with me on one level or another. Maybe because of when I played it, of the hype I felt at the time, my affinity with a story or characters, or even my appreciation of specific mechanics. One small disclaimer before we get into it, I've restrained myself to one game per franchise, so even though I'm a big Zelda fan, I will only have one Zelda game in the top 5. So, let's get going with that list. Metal Gear Solid 2 was released in 2001, and at this time, I had never seen a game with such epic movie qualities. It was my first Metal Gear, and regardless of the nonsensical plot, I was blown away by the production value and engrossed by the rich lore and character development. So, when they announced that they were gonna make MGS3, I got hyped like I'd rarely been before. I couldn't wait to learn more about the Patriots Solid Snake and Ocelot. But then we learned that it wouldn't be a sequel, but rather a prequel, set 45 years prior to the events of MGS2. It would feature Big Boss, Solid Snake's genetic source, and would be set in the heat of the Cold War. To be honest, I was confused and reluctant at first. But as I first booted the game, I was greeted by an even larger cinematic experience, and deeper and more interesting gameplay features. This time, it felt literally like I was playing a James Bond movie.
I give my life, not for honor, but for you.
The story was intriguing from start to finish. The characters were deep and fun, and the game itself was actually fun to play, with systems like camouflage and disguises, incredibly varied boss encounters, and quirky ways to get around enemies. This is also the first time I ever cried in a video game. During that epic ending showing Big Boss saluting the boss's grave. What could ever be better than that? Having grown in the 90s, I was always aware of the Final Fantasy franchise, and kind of understood its appeal. But being quite young, and not so good at English, reading the long text in all those games was always a turn-off, and when I finally got better at English, I couldn't find the emo whiny protagonist of FF7 and 8 engaging. I liked the magic, the summons, and the cutscenes, but that was pretty much it. Then came along Final Fantasy IX. Somewhat of a return to source to the fantasy setting of the original Nintendo games. I was immediately interested in the characters, the story, and the art. It had colors. Holy Christ, do I like colors! The protagonist Zidane, or Zidane, or Zidane, or whatever the fuck you want to call him, was joyful and fun, and I could immediately relate to him. Everything in the game felt whimsical, and gameplay was straightforward but deep, with some level of strategy as to what skill you should spend time learning, but nothing as convoluted as the junction system from 8. All this made it a joy to go through. It was actually the first heavy RPG I ever finished, and it also convinced me to go back through the series and play all the previous games, which I eventually got attached to as well. Yes, even 8. I was somewhat of a scaredy cat as a kid, so horror movies were a big no-no. Even when my parents wanted me to watch some light horror or kid horror movies, I would scream and go hide in my room. Games were on a pretty similar spectrum to me. I wouldn't play Resident Evil and got freaking traumatized when I saw my mom play Phantasmagoria. As I grew older, I started watching game reviews, and on a tech TV show, La Revanche des Nerds, I saw a review of Silent Hill 2. It was an horror game, but the ambience and the story seemed extremely intriguing to me. So I rented it at the video store and started playing. As soon as the theme of Laura started playing, I got absorbed by the CGI trailer rolling in front of me. I couldn't understand half of what I was seeing, but I knew I wanted more. I started the game and got amazed by the slow pacing. I had never played a game with such an atmosphere. The sound design was chilling, and the level design purposefully kept the intro going for way longer than any other game would have done. Then, it started raining a slew of grotesque and disturbing imagery, midway between repulsing and appealing. There was a strangeness to what I saw and heard, and that made me curious to see and hear even more, and I devoured the game to the end. So this game kickstarted my love for horror and made me understand that horror could go deeper and be more intricate than gore and jump scares. I started playing video games when I was about 3, and even before that I would watch my parents play while sitting on their lap. The first time my mom showed me Myst, though, when I was about 10 years old, I was taken aback. It was the first time I'd seen a game that felt more like exploring a world than playing. My cognitive skills were not yet quite acute enough to solve the complex puzzles by myself, but I loved exploring the mysterious islands and slowly discovered the truth about that world and its sparse inhabitants. Of course, all while pestering my mom, asking what to do to proceed when I got stuck at any puzzle. Then, a year later, Riven, its sequel, got released, and it was simply awe-inspiring in every way. The world was immense, the graphics were the most realistic I'd ever seen, and the storytelling was on another level compared to any game I'd ever seen. It was Myst times 11. Riven marked me so much that I actually used it as an analysis subject for my admittance exam into level design school, back in 2011. I explained how the world was interconnected in intricate ways rarely seen in games, how the puzzles and environmental storytelling are merged together, and how not a single frame in the game serves no purpose. No puzzle is simply about finding the right thing by roaming around. They are all interconnected with the world logic and narrative. Must find out how to operate a map room to pinpoint locations on a grid that powers up part of the island, and need to find clever ways to open new paths, like powering down the air ducts to crawl through them, and finally, link all the islands together with shortcuts. The game is not about finding stuff, it's about understanding the world and how things work. And that opened my mind in very meaningful ways and made me a puzzle lover. The first game I can remember seeing is Duck Hunt on the NES. But the first game I remember loving is The Legend of Zelda. It was one of the games I grew up with and saw my parents play since I was a baby. When I got older, I wanted to play for myself but found it incredibly difficult. So I ended up playing the first 3 dungeons and restarting the game in a loop for what seemed to be forever. Then, one day my mom came back from work with a Super Nintendo, borrowed from a friend, and we went out to go buy A Link to the Past. I became obsessed with that game. I found it more compelling and addictive than the first one. But eventually, my mom had to return the console to her friends before I could ever see the ending. That's when my friend Evan got his Super Nintendo, so I would go to his place and we would play the game together until one day we finally finished it. One day at the amusement park, there was a booth with Nintendo games showed up, and I got in to find out that it was a taste of the first ever full 3D games, Super Mario 64. I was amazed, and I remember finding it so hard to control. When the console finally released, I would rent it at the video store and play Mario 64 every weekend. And then came E3 1998, and I got the internet with a modem that hijacked the telephone line and made a battleship sound. Trailers and screenshots started to show publicly about the next Zelda, the first to be fully 3D, the one that would end up being The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. That was the first hype train I got on. It was the beginning of the internet and direct marketing to consumers. I became completely obsessed with the game and wanted nothing more than finally play it. In November of that year, it finally got released, and holy shizzles! It was a shock. The epic nature of the game, the darker tone, the vast world to explore, the fully 3D real-time gameplay were all what I'd always had in my mind when playing 2D games, but this time for real. I could explore the world of Hyrule, interact with anything, fight monsters, ride a horse, cut bushes, cut wooden signs for Christ's sake! It was big and impressive. And to this day still regarded as one of the biggest milestones in gaming. It pioneered several gaming concepts that we still use today, like camera targeting, contextual actions, shield blocking, first-person hybrid aiming, and so many others. It still has one of the most clever level design I've ever seen. Everything is built with an organic hub structure in mind. The dungeons are all based on opening shortcuts, hence the final room is always close to the entrance, a structure still used in a lot of games, specifically in the Souls-like genre. Then there's the story, which was the most epic to have ever been told in a game up until that point. It felt like a large-scale medieval epic where you need to save the world. And when you finally think you've done it and got the ultimate weapon, BAM! You learn that you fucked up and allowed the bad guy to take control of Hyrule and rule it over 7 years, wrecking everything and killing everyone in his path. Talk about a plot twist. Did I talk about the ambience and thematics? Because it covers everything. From a whimsical start with fairies and children spirit, to epic and grand, to joyful, to spooky, to freaking terrifying. The thematization and the world building made this world and its inhabitants incredibly memorable and forever part of the gaming pantheon. Alright, I think that's enough for today. Let me know what you think of this top 5. Do you agree? Do you have a different top 5? Please let me know in the comment section below. And until next time, bye bye.